People, what is the best accidental unclothed moment you have seen? Every summer, I head to my friend's cabin to celebrate the 4th of July with his family. They're all blessed with incredible genetics, and his older sister is stunning. One afternoon, after we'd been tubing for a while, the girls were lounging on the back of the boat, tanning with their bikini tops unhooked, for the tan lines. I ended up chatting with my friend's sister, who was lying on her stomach with her eyes closed. As we were talking, a spider must have crawled right in front of her face. The moment she opened her eyes, she freaked out, jerking her face and upper body away from the spider, leaving her bikini top behind in the process. For what felt like an eternity, we locked eyes for a solid 2 seconds before my gaze dropped. We both burst out laughing as she quickly laid back down, trying to cover up. Meanwhile, everyone else on the boat was completely confused, having no idea what had just happened. Since that day, I've never killed a spider. Instead, I always pick them up and take them outside, hoping to repay that spider for being the ultimate wingman in one of the most memorable moments of my life. Story 2. When I was 19, I took part in a sister cities program that brought students from different countries to the US. It was a great experience where we got to meet people from all over the world. As part of the program, we had a trip to California planned, which included stops at Disneyland and a day at the beach. On the beach day, I found myself hanging out with a guy from France. His English was pretty limited, so our conversation was minimal, mostly just nods and smiles as we watched the waves and people around us. It was a relaxing moment, just soaking up the California sun, until things took an unexpected turn. One of the girls I had a major crush on was out in the waves, laughing and having fun. A particularly big wave hit her, knocking her bikini top out of place. For a brief moment, her perfect chesticles were completely exposed. She didn't notice for a solid 30 seconds, but the French guy and I definitely did. We both froze, just staring, unsure of what to do. Eventually, she realized what had happened and quickly adjusted her top, looking a little embarrassed but laughing it off. As the moment passed, the French guy turned to me with a completely serious expression and said in his thick accent, "I love American." I couldn't help but burst out laughing. What a way to bring the world together. Story 3. When I was about 21, my family decided to take a trip to Schlitterbahn, the massive water park in New Braunfels, Texas. We'd been there plenty of times before, but this particular visit is one I'll never forget. Around the park, they have this lazy river, which is basically a loop of water where you float around on tubes, propelled by a wave machine. I was drifting along when I noticed this girl, probably about my age, give or take a year, who was absolutely stunning. She was struggling to get onto her tube, so I decided to help out by holding it steady for her while she climbed on. We were near the wave machine, which meant we were right in the path of the full force of the waves. Just as she leaned forward to balance herself on the tube, a big wave hit us. The tube flipped, and she went straight into the water. As soon as the wave passed, I started looking around for her to make sure she was okay. Just as I was about to get off my tube to help, she popped up from the water, without her bikini top. It took her a second to realize what had happened. Meanwhile, I was frozen, staring, and quietly thanking my past self for buying those glasses fasteners that made my sunglasses float because they hid my eyes perfectly. Let me just say, her chest is forever etched into my memory. Best I've ever seen in real life. When she realized her top was missing, she quickly dipped back into the water, found it, and put it back on. The whole thing was over in less than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. Fast forward 5 years, and now she's my wife. LOL, just kidding. I'm 26, single and need a job. I haven't seen her since. Story 4. This happened about 3 years ago. I was back in school after taking a long break. I was in my late 20s, trying to pick up the pieces after a failed marriage and get my life back on track. I had a cultural anthropology class with a buddy of mine, and in that class, there was this one girl, loud, obnoxious, and always speaking out when she wasn't called on. She was the kind of person who acted like she knew everything and wasn't shy about it. But here's the thing. She was also the most stunning leggy blonde you could imagine. Gorgeous in a classic way, with a flawless face, long blonde hair that looked like it belonged in a shampoo commercial, and a tall, curvy figure that seemed to hit all the right marks. Fast forward to the end of the semester. I was still recovering from my failed marriage, feeling down and out. My friend and I were sitting outside at a coffee shop near the school when it happened. It was late spring in California, and there she was, leggy loudmouth as we called her. She was wearing super short cutoff shorts and a loose tank top with no bra. There were bike racks next to the table where we were sitting, and she bent down to unlock her bike. Now, I wasn't exactly blind to her beauty. Who could be? but I definitely didn't expect her loose tank top to hang just perfectly, giving me an unobstructed view of the most amazing boobaroos I had ever seen. My friend, oblivious to the situation, was chatting away with me, completely unaware of the view I had just been gifted. Here she was, this drop-dead gorgeous woman, struggling with her bike lock while her top dangled down, exposing her, glorious attributes right in front of me. Finally, she freed the bike, climbed aboard, and sped off. After coming back to Earth after a few seconds, I explained to my friend what had just occurred in front of me. It's strange, though. In contrast to the despair I was typically dealing with at the time, that moment seemed to turn things around. It's silly, they're just two soft melons, but really, I kind of felt hopeful after that little bit of luck. Everything isn't always going to be terrible, I thought to myself. Story 5. There was this guy I had a major crush on in high school who lived directly across the street from me. Their house had a glass door and a regular door, and they would often leave the regular door wide open, which meant you could see right inside. I had spent a fair amount of time staring out the window and hoping for a glimpse of him. One morning, while I was waiting for the bus, and he was walking down the stairs in just his inners, looking totally oblivious to the fact that I was watching. But then, out of nowhere, his brother came up behind him and pantsed him, yanking down his undies and completely catching him off guard. It could have been incredibly awkward, but oddly enough, it wasn't. We just locked our eyes for a brief second, both of us frozen for a second as he awkwardly tried to cover himself. Slowly, he made his way back up the stairs, walking backward with one hand desperately covering his pickle. We laughed about it for a good while afterwards. We don't talk anymore, though. Story 6. In college, my girlfriend and I were planning a hiking trip. She lived in her own apartment, and we'd been friends for a while. So much so that we were completely comfortable around each other, even when it came to being unclothed. We changed in front of each other so many times that it wasn't a big deal anymore. So, there she was, packing for our trip, totally bare, since she was at home and didn't have to worry about anyone else being around. I was just about to pull up to her place. At a stoplight, I texted her to let her know I was almost there, and then I found a parking spot. After grabbing my stuff, I walked up to her apartment and knocked on the door. When she opened it, I was greeted with a sight I definitely didn't expect. She was standing there, completely bare, laughing and looking a little red in the face. I was confused, wondering what was going on, and she immediately started telling me what had happened. Apparently, only a couple of minutes after I texted her, there was another knock at her door. Since she'd just gotten my message, she figured it was me arriving early, so she opened the door without thinking. To her surprise, it wasn't me. It was two Mormon missionaries. They must have been equally surprised, seeing her standing there and nothing. I guess they didn't know what to say, but she quickly realized the mix-up and hurried to cover up. I couldn't stop laughing as she told me about the awkward exchange. The poor missionaries were probably hoping they'd be able to introduce themselves without seeing that sight. We definitely didn't expect that little mishap, but it turned out to be a hilarious story we'll both always remember. Story 7. I was 20 years old, and my girlfriend and I had plans for a date. We'd been out for about half an hour when she realized she had forgotten something at home, so we decided to head back to her place. By this point, we'd been dating long enough that I didn't think twice about getting out of the car and walking into her house with her. Her house was a split level, so when you walk in, you have the option of either going up or down. I ended up leading the way, heading upstairs. About halfway up, I just stopped in my tracks. There, in full view, were her mom and stepdad, let's just say an intimate moment, with her mom on top, facing me. We locked eyes for a brief second before the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My girlfriend, not quite understanding what had stopped me, gave me a gentle push, trying to get me to keep moving. But then, she saw exactly what I had seen. Her mom quickly grabbed a blanket from the couch, trying to cover herself up, but it was too late. My girlfriend exploded in anger, yelling at them, demanding they explain what the heck was going on. I, on the other hand, had no words. I just slowly backed out of the house, deciding I wasn't about to stick around for the aftermath. The entire situation was beyond awkward. The following week, we had a picnic planned, and it was painfully uncomfortable. There was this unspoken tension hanging over us the entire time. Neither of us knew how to bring it up, and I was still in shock from what had happened. The whole experience was definitely one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. Story 8. This happened years ago when my friend and I were working the midnight shift together at a factory. We were building a large part for an even bigger machine, and it was one of those shifts where you get to have long conversations to pass the time. We started chatting about our favorite bands and the concerts we'd been to over the years. As the conversation flowed, We somehow ended up discussing the crazy antics some entertainers get up to during their performances. Things like smashing guitars, crowd surfing, pulling fans up on stage, and the like. We were both really into rock music, so the stories were flying. At one point, we started talking about Jim Morrison, a legend neither of us had seen live, but we'd heard about all the wild things he did during shows. One of those things was that he flashed the crowd. Now, I thought Jim had mooned the crowd, but my friend, who had a bit of a mischievous side, decided to show me how he thought the flashing went down. He hooked his thumbs into his waistband like he was going to demonstrate what it looked like to release his member. What he didn't realize, though, was that he also caught his underwear in the process. Before we knew it, my friend had unintentionally given myself and a couple of other coworkers an up-close and personal view of his baby maker. We were all standing right in the middle of the shop floor when it happened. All he could say was, "Oops," as he hurriedly shoved everything back in place. There was an awkward moment of silence before the entire group of us burst into laughter. He turned bright red and started apologizing like crazy. The rest of the shift was pretty hilarious, but he kept his distance from us for the remainder of the night. Good times for sure, although I'm sure he'll never live that one down. Story 9. I had to surrender my dignity for my son's safety. 2 weeks ago, my wife and I took our 2 kids camping in the Adirondacks. After 2 full days of sweaty lake swims, tent sleeping, and all-around roughing it, we decided it was time to head to the campground shower facility. We were all definitely in need of a good cleaning. My wife took our 4-year-old daughter to the girls' side, and I took our 2-year-old son with me. He's an adorable, chunky little guy who, like most toddlers, finds almost everything funny. More on that in a bit. The facility had 25 stalls, and it was completely empty when we arrived. I picked a shower stall, set up all our shower supplies, and started undressing my son. He was already standing there, fascinated by the water coming down from the shower head. From experience, I knew I had about 10 seconds before he'd lose interest and move on to something else. So, I took the opportunity to undress and turned around to join him in the shower. But when I looked back, he was gone. I stepped out of the stall, without any clothing, and looked around. He wasn't in the stall next to us, and when I looked up, I saw him running toward the exit, about 20 feet away. This is where I made a classic dad mistake. Thinking I could catch him, I sprinted after him, calling out, "Oscar, stop!" But he just giggled and kept running, glancing back at me, showing no sign of slowing down. At that point, I had no choice but to keep chasing him, all while completely bare, through the parking lot. There was no time to grab a towel or put anything on. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. There was one other car in the lot, and I'll never forget the look on the woman's face who was sitting alone in the passenger seat. I was about 10 feet away, a fully bare 39-year-old man running after my laughing toddler. She did the only thing she could, pretend it wasn't happening. She was really good at pretending too, but we both knew what she saw. I'm sure she's telling that story around her campsite right now. When I finally caught up with my son, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. As I scooped him up and turned back toward the shower, I quickly covered my private parts with his little body. It wasn't the most graceful moment, but it sure was a memorable one. Story 10. So, one night, my sister and her boyfriend were, well, getting busy in her room. It was a bit hard to ignore the noise, but after a while, it kind of just became background noise. About an hour later, I hear her door close, and I think to myself, finally, he's gone. Now I can use the bathroom in peace. I walk into the bathroom, turn off the light since it's dark in there, and drop my pants to squat down on the toilet. Just as I'm about to sit, the light suddenly flips on, and her boyfriend, completely bare, walks out of the bathroom and says, "Ready for more?" I stare just in shock, and he now realizes that I am not my sister. So, he just coughs and walks away. I no longer felt safe to crap in my own bathroom. I then pulled my pants up and just went to bed. Story 11. When I was in college, there was this super attractive Korean girl in one of my classes who would often ask me for help with interpreting lecture notes. English wasn't her first language, so she'd get a bit lost with some of the material. I was more than happy to help her out, and over time, we developed a kind of casual friendship. One day, after we had gone through some notes together, she mentioned that she had to leave because her mother was visiting. A few minutes after she left, I noticed she had accidentally left her phone on the desk, so I figured I'd grab it and run out to the parking lot to find her. As I approached the car park, I spotted her from across the lot. She was standing between her car and the one parked next to it, kind of ducking behind the open door. At first, I thought she might be trying to hide for some reason, but as I got closer, I realized she was just rummaging through her handbag looking for her phone. So I gave it to her, and she was really appreciative. Then on my way back, I accidentally saw a drunk guy with his pickle out. It was the best. Story 12. I work at a hotel right on the beach, and most nights before I finish up for the day, I like to take a quick walk around the building to make sure everything is in order. People are settled, things are quiet, and so on. The hotel has balconies for every room, but fortunately, the way the building is designed, you can't see into another room's balcony from any given one, which adds a little privacy for guests. Earlier that day, a newlywed couple checked in, and everything went smoothly with their check-in process. Later that night, while I was doing my rounds, I happened to walk by their room and saw them on their balcony. The husband was leaning against a patio chair, which was turned backward, with his pants down, and the wife was sitting on the chair, giving him a blowy. Now, technically, this could have been a reason for an eviction, but I remembered that the couple had just gotten married, and given the way the building is set up, no one else could see them. So, I just decided to turn around and go back inside, letting them enjoy their moment in peace. At least I know their marriage got off to a good start. Hopefully it stayed that way. Story 13. When I was 19, I was living with my older brother and his then-wife. One day, my brother needed some help working on an old boat that someone had sold him. He had set the boat up just outside his bedroom window, where he planned to work on it. This detail is not exactly important, but it does make what happened next a lot funnier. My brother and I have a lot of similarities in terms of our build and features. Basically, we look like typical siblings. But there's one noticeable difference. I'm biracial and he's white. At the time, his wife, my sister-in-law, didn't realize I was out there helping him. The boat was in a poorly lit area, so she didn't notice the difference in our skin tones. Now, this is where things get a little funny and awkward. She had no idea I was out there, so she casually walked up to the window, lifted the blinds, and knocked on the glass, completely clothless. She didn't expect me to pop up from behind the boat and catch her mid-knock. I could tell by the look on her face that she was shocked, and then we both realized what was happening. Just as I was standing there, my brother came walking around the corner, saw the situation unfolding, and completely lost it. He just fell down laughing, making the whole thing even more ridiculous. After that moment, things were a little awkward. We had some uncomfortable dinners, and whenever she drove me home, there was this unspoken tension in the air. But the real awkwardness came about 3 weeks later. My brother and his wife had to help me with a testicular issue I was dealing with, and that moment took the awkwardness to a whole new level. It was definitely a series of events that I don't think any of us will ever forget, and it certainly made for some unforgettable, cringe-worthy family moments. Story 14. It wasn't accidental per se, but I definitely wasn't supposed to be there to witness what happened. I was on holiday in Oslo, exploring the city, when I decided to visit this one park that I had heard a lot about. The park is famous for being filled with statues, all of which depict clothless people in various poses and materials. All the statues were sculpted by Gustav Vigeland, and the area is appropriately named Vigeland Sandlaget. The most striking feature of the park is the monolith, a towering obelisk made up of intertwined human figures. It's surrounded by a series of stairs and blocks, each topped with statues that break up the stairs into different segments. The whole scene is impressive, almost mesmerizing, and as I stood there taking it all in, I made sure to take my time and walk around the monument to get a full view of it. Just as I was enjoying the sight, summer rain began to fall. Most of the tourists rushed for cover, but I was prepared. I had a raincoat with me, so I stayed put and continued to admire the sculptures in the rain. Interestingly enough, 2 rather attractive American tourists, both women, didn't leave either. Along with them was a guy who seemed content to watch. The 2 women, apparently feeling free-spirited in the moment, decided to pull down their tops and lift their skirts, likely to take a few cheeky pictures that blended in with the nudity of the statues around them. I liked it, and at the same time it was very weird. Story 15. It was almost the end of the year in high school, and we were in one of those rare moments when the teacher gave us a free period. He told us we could sit where we liked, but that we needed to keep the noise level at a reasonable volume. I was feeling pretty tired that day, so I decided to lay down on the floor in between one of the rows of desks. I wasn't expecting anything interesting to happen, but as luck would have it, a female classmate came over and sat next to me. She started talking to me, and we ended up having a pretty casual conversation. At some point, we got into a discussion about which gender was better, or something along those lines. Honestly, I'm not sure how we ended up there. But what I did know was that she had a huge crush on me, though I didn't return those feelings, though looking back, maybe I should have. During our conversation, she suddenly said, "Women are better because we can be in heat and no one would know." The way she said it was playful, but I had no idea where this conversation was going. Then, she did something that completely caught me off guard. She got up from where she was sitting and, with a purposeful stride, walked right over me, giving me an unintended but very clear view up her skirt. I had to get off my back after that and tuck that sucker up the waistband. Story 16. When I was living in New Zealand, I had this one night that's always stuck with me. My roommate had gone out to the bar and came back with some guy. To my surprise, they ended up doing it on the couch, which, unfortunately for me, was positioned right on the opposite side of the wall from my bed. So, I had a front row seat to the whole thing, at least in terms of sound. But that's not really the point of the story. The next morning, I woke up to a text from another roommate. She casually mentioned that there was a guy, all bare, passed out on the couch. I, of course, couldn't resist a bit of curiosity, so I casually made my way to the bathroom. But instead of just heading straight there, I took my time, trying to sneak a peek as I walked past the living room. And sure enough, there he was, sprawled out on the couch, in nothing and snoring away like he had no care in the world. The roommate who had brought him home was nowhere to be seen. I started to wonder what had happened. We eventually found her later, curled up without any clothing on the bathroom floor. Neither of them seemed to have any recollection of the night before, but somehow, they ended up together, and after all of that, they're now married. Story 17. When I was young, I used to go to a summer camp in a different state, and as part of the camp, we would often take these multi-day canoe trips, paddling down rivers and exploring the surrounding wilderness. One trip in particular stands out in my memory. After a long day of paddling down the river, our trip leader decided it was time to stop and set up camp for the night. We landed on a small island in the middle of the river and began to settle in. The weather had been sunny all day, but as the evening approached, the clouds rolled in, and soon enough, it started to rain. And then, just like that, the rain turned into a full-on monsoon. The wind picked up, and we all scrambled to huddle under a large tarp for shelter. As we sat there, trying to stay dry, one of the boys pointed across the river and shouted, "Hey, look, people are swimming." Naturally, we all leaned in, curious to see who would be crazy enough to swim in the rainstorm. To our surprise, we saw two guys and a girl on the opposite shore, swimming in the river. They were pretty far away, but we couldn't take our eyes off them. As we kept watching, something caught our attention. The girl stood up, and that's when we realized she was completely bare. In fact, the entire group was skinny dipping. We couldn't resist the opportunity to have some fun with the situation. We started yelling and waving at them, asking if they wanted any s'mores, while passing around the binoculars to get a closer look. We figured they'd be embarrassed and quickly swim away, but much to our surprise, they didn't seem fazed at all. In fact, one of the guys started swimming toward our side of the river. He slowed down, probably wondering what he'd gotten himself into. But we were already prepared, so we offered him a s'more when he finally reached the shore. Story 18. I was upstairs in my house, enjoying the view out the window, which overlooks the alley and the neighbor's backyard. My attention was drawn to their hot tub area, where I noticed the woman next door stepping outside, seemingly preparing to use the tub. Out of curiosity, I kept watching, wondering what would happen next. Just as I adjusted my position to get a better look, her husband appeared, walking up to her. To my surprise, he opened his robe right in front of me. Let's just say, I ended up seeing much more of him than I ever expected. It was certainly not the scene I anticipated. Story 19. My wife is a twin, and every year, both of our families rent a house near a lake or some other scenic spot to spend quality time together. It's always a lively, chaotic time with everyone catching up, the kids running around, and plenty of activities planned. One morning, we were getting ready to go boating, and I walked into the bedroom to change into my swim trunks. I saw my wife in the process of putting on her bathing suit, so I casually dropped my shorts and started changing too. As we were both standing there, I started chatting away about the kids or whatever random story was on my mind. About 20 seconds into the conversation, I realized something felt off. That's when it hit me. I was not talking to my wife. Turns out, I'd walked in on her twin sister, and she had stayed completely silent the entire time, probably amused by how oblivious I was. I froze for a second, completely mortified, while she started laughing. My wife thought it was equally hilarious when she found out. To be fair, I can normally tell them apart without any issue. It's just that I was so focused on changing in mid-story that I didn't even glance up properly. If her sister had said a single word, I would have immediately noticed the difference. But nope. She just let me carry on like a fool. Now, it's a family story they all love to tease me about. Story 20. When I was a teenager at summer camp, we went on a group canoeing trip, and I got paired up with a girl who I found really attractive. She was wearing a bikini that seemed a bit too big for her, and it kept shifting as we got settled in the canoe. She sat across from me as we paddled down the river, and I couldn't help but notice that her swimsuit bottom wasn't fitting properly. It was so loose that it left very little to the imagination. The trip lasted about 2 hours, and I spent most of it trying to focus on paddling, the scenery, and anything else to avoid making things awkward. Being a teenager, I didn't exactly know how to handle the situation, and I definitely didn't want to say anything that might embarrass her or myself. Story 21. My brother used to hook up with this girl who had a friend that was, hands down, one of the most attractive people I've ever seen. She had everything, gorgeous features, an incredible figure, and an air of confidence that made her stand out. Anytime she was around, it was hard not to notice her. One night, my brother went out drinking and got way too hammered. He ended up heading back to the house of the girl he was seeing, which was conveniently within walking distance of the bar. I decided to check on him to make sure he was all right since he'd clearly had more than his fair share of drinks. When I got to the house, I walked into the room where my brother was passed out on the bed with the girl he was hooking up with. She was wide awake, sitting nearby, and seemed completely unfazed. But what really caught me off guard was that her incredibly attractive friend was also in the room, changing. I walked right in as she was in the middle of taking off her clothes. For a moment, she was completely exposed, and I just froze, not knowing what to do. She noticed me almost immediately, let out a scream, and quickly turned around, giving me an equally unforgettable view from behind before grabbing something to cover herself. It was one of the best moments of my life. Story 22. Back in high school, one day during lunch, my friends and I got into a full-on tickle fight in the cafeteria. It started as playful chaos, with everyone attacking everyone else and trying to outmaneuver one another. My best friend's girlfriend at the time was part of the group, and she was wearing a tank top that day, casually skipping the need for a bra underneath. At one point, I ended up backed against the wall while she stood directly in front of me, facing me, trying to figure out how to break through my defenses. The rest of my friends were behind her, waging their own little tickle battles. It was the kind of absurd scene that only teenagers could create without a second thought. As she strategized her next move, someone snuck up behind her, an unexpected player in the game, and decided to tickle her under her arms. That surprise attack made her jump forward toward me. Unfortunately for her, but incredibly memorable for me, the person behind her didn't let go in time, and their fingers hooked onto the strap of her tank top, pulling it down in the process. What followed was about 10 seconds of pure awkwardness. As she tried to wrestle free from the tickling hands, she was too distracted to notice that her top had shifted entirely out of place, leaving her completely exposed right in front of me. I stood there, frozen, unsure of how to react but absolutely unable to look away. Eventually, the chaos subsided, and she fixed her top without even realizing I'd gotten quite the front row seat to the unexpected wardrobe malfunction. Later on, I told my best friend what had happened. He laughed and asked me what I thought, and I honestly told him that they were incredible. He just grinned, agreed wholeheartedly, and we high-fived like the carefree teenagers we were before heading off to our next classes. Story 23. Back in college, I worked at a store that bought and sold coins and stamps. My main role was buying, thanks to my knack for memorizing prices and my friendly demeanor, which somehow softened the blow when I had to tell people their priceless heirlooms weren't worth much. One day, this incredibly attractive girl walked in with a bag of coins left to her by her grandfather. She explained that she wanted to sell them to help fund a trip she was planning. The coins were in a bag on the floor, and every time she bent down to pull one out, her loose, low-cut shirt, with no bra in sight, gave me an uninterrupted view. I couldn't decide if this was her negotiation strategy or just a wardrobe choice, but either way, I wasn't about to complain. She showed me all the coins, and after inspecting them, I knew they were worth maybe $10 total. Still, I handed her $75 from my own wallet. It wasn't a great deal for the coins, but I'd call it a worthwhile investment for the story and the experience. Edit. Let me clear up a few things before you think I'm a complete jerk. First, that $75 came out of my pocket, not the store's money. I would never jeopardize the trust I'd earned from my boss. The store had strict rules. Every transaction was documented, items were bagged and stored for 30 days, and everything was recorded for police checks. I explained what happened to my boss, and he found it hilarious. He even gave me a pat on the back for the honesty. I loved my job and was known for being fair, paying a little extra here, and there built goodwill, which brought in more referrals. In a high-traffic area, that goodwill meant everything. We ran a clean operation, so ripping people off wasn't just unethical. It would have been bad for business. But let's not lose focus. The story is about titbits, not coins. Story 24. Back in high school, I used to walk to my neighbor's house every morning to pick him up for school. I had a car, and he didn't yet, so we'd carpool together. We were both juniors, but his older sister, a senior, had late arrival and usually stayed home a bit longer in the mornings. Most days, I barely saw her, just a quick hello as we were heading out the door. One Friday morning, I got to his house a little earlier than usual because we had plans to hit up McDonald's or the bakery before school. I was standing in the kitchen waiting for him, minding my own business, when out of nowhere, his sister walked into the room, fresh out of the shower, completely bare, drying her hair like it was just another day. For about 2 full seconds, I froze, absolutely stunned, unable to do anything but stare. It was like my brain short-circuited. She didn't even notice me at first, but when she did, her reaction was a mix of a scream and a laugh. Meanwhile, I panicked, shouted, "Sorry," at full volume, and spun around like that would undo what had just happened. She bolted back to her room, still laughing, leaving me standing there, red-faced and mortified. I decided not to say anything to anyone about it, including my friend. It seemed better to pretend it never happened. But later that day, we had physics class together, and she walked in with her face bright red, still giggling. She caught my eye, gave me a playful smirk, and kept laughing quietly to herself. I have to hand it to her. She was a great sport about the whole thing. No awkwardness, no drama, just a funny, albeit embarrassing, moment for both of us. It became one of those memories that stuck with me, not just because of the situation, but because of how she handled it. Story 25. One of the most memorable moments of my teenage years happened during my freshman year at a large university. I had just turned 18 and was adjusting to campus life, where everything felt exciting and new. It was still early in the school year, during that warm window when students wore shorts and skirts, taking advantage of the lingering summer weather. One day, I was walking along a narrow campus-side street that also connected to some shops and the bookstore. As I strolled along, a girl walked out of a door about 10 feet ahead of me. She was dressed in a short skirt, which wasn't unusual, but what caught my attention immediately was that the back of her skirt had gotten tucked into the waistband of her underwear, leaving her almost thong completely exposed. At first, I wasn't sure I had seen it correctly, so I glanced again and, yep, there it was, a full view of her lower half. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. I instinctively looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but the street was oddly empty. It was just me and this girl with her unintentional wardrobe malfunction, walking in front of me. I picked up my pace, trying to catch her before she reached the busy intersection just ahead, where dozens of students would undoubtedly see her. When I got close enough, I said as gently and respectfully as possible, "Hey, I think your skirt is caught in the back." She froze mid-step, her face instantly turning bright red. Without saying a word, she quickly fixed the skirt, covering herself, then looked back at me with a mix of embarrassment and panic. She mumbled a quiet thanks, avoided eye contact, and hurried off in the opposite direction. I felt a little bad. She was clearly mortified and probably worried that I was some kind of creep, but I knew I'd done the right thing by telling her before she ended up walking into a crowd like that. Story 26. I was at a formal event one evening, the kind where everyone's dressed to the nines, suits, ties, elegant dresses, the whole deal. The atmosphere was classy, with soft music playing and people mingling, sipping on drinks, and making small talk. At one point, I noticed my friend's date standing a little off to the side, chatting with someone. She was absolutely stunning. One of those women who naturally drew attention in a crowd. She was wearing a strapless dress, which looked amazing on her, but then I realized something wasn't quite right. Her dress had slipped down just enough that one of her titbits was completely exposed. It wasn't obvious to her at all. She was standing there, smiling, and completely unaware of the wardrobe malfunction. My first instinct was to look around and see if anyone else had noticed, but thankfully, it didn't seem like anyone had, yet. I didn't want to embarrass her by walking up and saying something directly, so I caught my friend's eye and subtly gestured toward her. At first, he looked confused, but when I glanced at his date and then back at him with a raised eyebrow, he caught on. Without missing a beat, he casually strolled over, put his arm around her shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world, and gently pulled her dress back into place. She looked down, realized what had happened, and turned bright red. Poor girl. She gave him a sheepish smile, clearly embarrassed but grateful that he handled it so smoothly. Story 27. I was over at my brother's house one evening, playing poker with a few friends. We were downstairs in the basement, enjoying the game, when I decided to take a break and head upstairs to grab some more beer for the fridge. As I walked through the kitchen, I absent-mindedly glanced toward my brother and his wife's bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. To my surprise, my sister-in-law was in there, changing. She hadn't noticed me, and for a moment, I just froze. I could see her profile clearly as she was adjusting her clothes, wearing only her inners. She wasn't completely exposed, but the view I got was enough to catch my attention. Her jugs weren't huge, but they were definitely nice, well-shaped and flattering. But what really stood out to me was her back. I had always known she had a relatively big back when I'd seen her in jeans, but seeing it up close like this was something else. Not only was it big and round, but it was firm and had this irresistible shape. It was a solid 5 seconds of pure, unexpected observation before she moved to the other side of the room, and the angle shifted so I could no longer see her. She and my brother got divorced about a year later, and she was crazy. Everyone wondered why he was with her for so long. I knew why. Story 28. Once when I was in high school, I smashed my head on a ceiling overhang. My head started spraying blood everywhere, at which point the girl with the biggest, most perfect melons in school rushed over and pulled off her little white tank top to put pressure on the wound with. I don't know if she realized or not, but her bra was pretty much completely see-through. I'd like to think that maybe she saved me from bleeding to death that day by completely redirecting blood flow from the open wound on my head. Story 29. I was in Florida with my wife, one of her friends, we'll call her Megan, and my wife's family. We were spending the day at the beach, and Megan happened to be, shall we say, well endowed in the chess department. Out of nowhere, my wife's grandpa leaned over to me and said, I wouldn't mind if Megan had a little wardrobe malfunction. No more than 10 seconds later, a wave came crashing in, and Megan's top fell right off. It felt like Grandpa had some kind of telepathic control over the situation, like he willed it into existence. Grandpa, ever the character, leaned back over to me and said with a grin, well, looks like I'm going to be sitting down for a while. My grandpa-in-law is definitely one of a kind. Story 30. One night, after a few drinks at the bar, some friends and I ended up at a Waffle House on the beach in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was one of those late-night stops where you're just trying to soak up some food and keep the night going. Inside, there were a few groups of sorority girl types sitting together, all wearing smaller cocktail dresses. After paying my bill, I decided to step outside to make a phone call and take a breather. As I was standing by the car, I noticed one of the hotter girls walking out, and I couldn't help but notice her dress. It was barely covering her bottom. I thought to myself, man, what I wouldn't give for a big gust of wind, considering we're right on the beach. Well, no sooner had the thought crossed my mind than the wind picked up like it had a mind of its own, and her dress blew straight up to her chest. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of the cutest leopard print thong I've ever seen. It felt like something straight out of a movie, like I was channeling Bruce Almighty or something. I couldn't believe it. Story 31. One time, a group of about 5 or 6 of my friends and I were heading out of my buddy's house to go play basketball at the courts. As we were leaving, I happened to look up at the window of his neighbor's top-floor apartment. He lived in a duplex, so I could see right into the neighboring unit. To my surprise, I saw his Chinese neighbor getting dressed, and she wasn't wearing a shirt. I immediately pointed up, and everyone turned to look, and sure enough, we all caught a glimpse of her. I couldn't help but shout, and the whole crew started yelling too, caught up in the excitement. Suddenly, she turned around, her eyes wide with shock as she realized that a group of boys had been admiring her from below. Without thinking, we all scattered in different directions, running like mad, our laughter echoing through the neighborhood as we tried to get as far away from the scene as possible. We must have looked like a bunch of cockroaches scattering when the lights come on. From that day on, I discovered I had what I like to call coconut vision, an uncanny ability to spot a wardrobe malfunction from a mile away. Whenever I would see her on her front porch after that, she would always give us a knowing smile, like she secretly enjoyed the chaos we caused that day. It became one of those inside jokes among us that we'd never forget. Story 32. During college, I ended up at a party one night that eventually moved to a local bar. It was one of those nights where everyone was letting loose, and I definitely had a few too many drinks by the time we got there. While I was chatting with some friends, one of the girls from a class ahead of mine, who was definitely one of the more attractive ones, came over and joined the conversation with me and this other guy. As we were talking, the guy seemed to have something on his mind. Apparently, he had made a bet with her earlier, and he saw this as the perfect moment to remind her of it. He turned to her and, with a mischievous grin, said something along the lines of, "Don't forget, you still owe me a flash." I'm pretty sure I'm paraphrasing here, but the point was clear enough. She gave him this look of annoyance, like she wasn't too thrilled with the idea, but then, out of nowhere, she just pulled her top down and flashed both of us. It lasted for a good 5 to 10 seconds. They were very nice, would 100% look again. Story 33. One soggy morning, I was walking to school, trying to make my way through the puddles and deal with the drizzle still hanging in the air. As I passed the parking lot, I happened to spot my art teacher, who was in her minivan. Now, normally, you couldn't really see much into the side passenger windows because they were semi-tinted a darker shade. But on this particular morning, the weather decided to cooperate for a brief moment. The rain had just stopped, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting a bright light over everything, including the car. That sudden burst of sunlight illuminated the van in such a way that it was as if the entire area was lit up. And that's when I noticed that I could see straight into the window. To my surprise, there she was, my art teacher, changing her clothes. I wasn't expecting that at all. She was 29 at the time, fit, and I'd always thought she was moderately attractive, but seeing her in that moment, completely unaware that I had a perfect view, was something else. Probably one of the best days at school followed thereafter. Story 34. In April of 1999, when I was in 6th grade, my entire class went on a massive field trip to Yellowstone National Park. The trip was part of a program called Expedition Yellowstone, which, if I remember correctly, was partially funded by grants. My small school, located in a rural part of the South, was fortunate enough to send the entire 6th grade, about 50 students, every year for several years, and I got the chance to go. We traveled by charter bus, thankfully, instead of a school bus, for the 36-plus-hour road trip. Along the way, we stopped at fast food places, usually McDonald's, for every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One of our stops was in Lincoln, Nebraska, at a strip mall, where several fast food restaurants were located. We went into whichever restaurant we chose, accompanied by our designated chaperones, ate our meal, and then headed back out to the bus. Now, this strip mall wasn't just home to McDonald's. It also housed a bar called Critters. We were sitting on the bus, waiting for the rest of our group to finish up and reboard, when two well-endowed young women exited the bar and began walking toward another charter bus parked in the lot. I'm not sure what they thought, but they either confused our bus with theirs, thought we were a group of their friends, or maybe they were just drunk. It was still daylight, after all. Whatever the reason, these two women decided to raise their shirts and flash our bus full of 6th graders. But it wasn't a quick flash. It was a full-on, lift your shirt and shake your chest kind of flash, something that would normally belong in a Girls Gone Wild video. Pandemonium immediately broke out on our bus. Teachers, chaperones, counselors, parents, and probably even the bus driver were scrambling to dive into the aisles, desperately trying to cover our eyes, but it was futile. We were all too excited and not nearly as innocent as they thought. It became the highlight of the entire trip, and we were barely even halfway through the 2-week-long journey. This was even after our bus got stuck in a whiteout blizzard in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming on the return trip, where we had to limp to the nearest town and spend the night sleeping on the floor of a high school gymnasium. Afterward, the jokes started flying, as you'd expect from a bunch of pre-adolescent kids. The Grand Tetons, the Twin Peaks, and so on. It was hilarious, and in many ways, I'd say it was a formative moment for a lot of us. Just a couple of years ago, at our high school's 10-year reunion, this story came up more than once. Story 35. Many years ago, when I was a student, I decided to take a trip to Egypt to study Arabic for about 6 months. During my stay, a friend of mine, let's call her F, came to visit, and she stayed with me for about a week. We spent our days exploring the usual tourist spots, Coptic Cairo, the pyramids, the Citadel, the Egyptian Museum, and the like. One afternoon, after a long day of sightseeing, I decided to relax on the balcony. I loved sitting out there with a book, letting the world pass by. The only catch was that to get to the balcony, I had to walk through the room where my friend was staying. While I was out there enjoying the breeze, my friend had decided to take a rest inside on her bed. About half an hour later, I went back inside to grab a drink, and as I walked into the room, I was completely unprepared for what I saw. She was lying there, completely exposed. To say I was caught off guard would be an understatement. It was awkward and embarrassing because I really liked her as a friend, but she was also very attractive. I stood there frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do or say, and she just casually got up, completely unbothered, and walked across the room to grab her dressing gown. I, on the other hand, was blundering through British-style apologies, stumbling over my words, and trying to make a quick exit while desperately trying to hide the very obvious awkwardness of my situation. Not to mention the immediate reaction that comes with being a 20-year-old and suddenly seeing a beautiful woman in the nip for the first time. We never really talked about it. I just pretended it hadn't happened, and we went out for dinner as if nothing had changed. That was the first time I saw her clothless, but it wasn't the last. Fast forward to now, and we're married. Edit. A few people have commented saying, "Glad you finally got the hint." Honestly, I didn't get the hint at all. In fact, I missed several more hints after that. The following year, when we decided to go on holiday together, she insisted we share a hotel room. I thought it was just a practical decision, and we got separate beds because, boundaries. I also thought she was just being polite when she invited me to her place, cooked me dinner, and danced with me under the stars. And when she invited herself to meet my parents, I thought it was just curiosity on her part. When she told me she loved me before I deployed to Iraq, I honestly thought she meant as a friend. After all, we were really close, shared so many common interests, and would talk for hours about anything and everything. Philosophy, career goals, ethical issues, and of course, the usual friend topics. For years, I had no clue. Then, one day, it all clicked. Further edit. People are asking how I could be so oblivious. I'll admit, I had zero experience with women at that point. I went to an all-boys school, and I wasn't exactly the most popular guy. I was kind of dorky and into geeky stuff, like history and philosophy, at a time when being a geek wasn't cool. I never thought of myself as particularly attractive, and I dressed in whatever my mom bought me. She, on the other hand, was cool, exotic, smelled amazing, and had the most stunning figure. Everything about her was so far out of my league. She was also passionate, adventurous, deeply faithful, and an amazing cook. I just figured there was no way she could find me attractive. I thought we were friends because we shared common interests, not because she might like me in a romantic or physical way. I even once sent her a draft of a constitution for an imaginary utopia, and not only did she read it, but she sent it back with detailed notes and comments. There's no way someone like her would ever think of me that way. At least that's what I believed at the time. Looking back, I realize how foolish I was, but I didn't want to risk ruining a good friendship by reading too much into things. Final edit. So, years later, she finally made it clear. She sent me an email that was basically like, "Hey, we've been best friends for years, and I want a husband. I want that husband to be you. If you ask me, I will say yes." At that point, I thought, wait, maybe I have a chance here. We've now been married for 13 years. We've had our ups and downs, as all couples do, but we're mostly happy, and I love her more than anything. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.